In this video, we're going to continue our study of Greek grammar. So far, in the first few lessons, we've studied what's called orthography, the first part of the art of grammar. We've talked about the Greek alphabet. We've learned the names of the letters. We've learned the sounds of the letters. We've learned about accentuation and aspiration or breathing. We've talked about apostrophe, where words are contracted and some letters dropped for the sake of pronunciation. And we've talked a little bit about punctuation. In this lesson, we're going to move into the second part of grammar, which is etymology. Now, in modern language, in modern society, you may hear the word etymology used in a sense that's different from the sense we're going to be using it in our grammar class. In most contexts in modern language, etymology refers to the study of the history of words. So you'll come across the word etymology in a vocabulary course, or where someone's trying to improve their vocabulary, dictionary studies, things like that. We try to understand the origins of words to get a really clear sense of what the words mean. That's one sense of the word etymology, but that's not the sense that we're using it here in grammar. In grammar, orthography refers to the letters and sounds, the most elementary, basic parts of the language. When we move into the second part, etymology, we start focusing not on letters and sounds or on syllables, but on words and the formation of words. And so etymology in Greek grammar is the study of the formation of Greek words, different forms of words, and so on, as we begin to move into this next part, making our way to syntax when we learn to form sentences. So we've studied orthography so far, and now we're moving into part 2 of grammar, which is etymology. And we'll spend the rest of Greek Grammar 1 studying Greek etymology. Okay? Now, to put grammar into the bigger context of our studies in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, what we have to realize is that grammar is the beginning of all of the arts, whether it's classical mathematics, classical logic and rhetoric, classical philosophy and theology. All of the arts and sciences depend on a right knowledge of grammar for any language. So as we get started, I want you to realize that this isn't just a study where we're learning how to express our ideas or learning how to say things the right way. That's really not what classical grammar is about. It's much more than that. In our classical studies, what we're seeking is true wisdom. That study is going to end in theology, where we study God and the knowledge of God that comes through divine revelation and is received by faith. That's where our education is headed. In grammar, we're just getting started on the first steps of that education. And it's important for us to understand how what we're doing at this step does to help us reach the highest step of philosophy and theology. St. Thomas Aquinas, based on the teaching of Aristotle, explained that philosophy basically divides into 3 or 4 different parts, and these parts have to do with how reason relates to the created world. St. Thomas teaches that it's the work of a wise man to order or to know order. That's what we seek to do. We never think that we truly understand something until we understand the order of it. And so wisdom is seeking to know the order of things, to know causes of things, and so on. That's what wisdom really is. And there are different kinds of order that we study in different parts of the classical Catholic curriculum. The first, the first form or mode of order that St. Thomas explained is the order that's present in human thought and in human words, because we really can't talk about human thought without connecting human thoughts to spoken words. So words and thoughts, or words and ideas, are really inseparable. And the study of words and sentences, which we're studying here in grammar, is the beginning of the study of logic, which is the first part of philosophy, rational philosophy. So we're seeking to understand how ideas are expressed and signified with words. We're seeking to understand this truly, because if we don't understand language truly, we won't understand logic truly, we won't be able to get into philosophy truly, we'll struggle in theology, and so on. Because all of these arts and sciences depend on a firm foundation in true grammar. And that's the focus of our study here in classical grammar. Now, we need to study the grammar of every different language that we wish to communicate and study in. So we need to study English grammar, we need to study Latin grammar, we need to study Greek grammar, we need to study Hebrew grammar, we need to study Italian and Spanish and French and German grammar. Any language that we wish to think, speak, study, or communicate in, we need to learn the grammar of that language so we can rightly think and speak and write using that language. Now, in ancient Greek, just like in classical Latin, we are not studying so that we can compose new writings in Latin or Greek. The goal of our study is to be able to read and rightly interpret Latin and Greek writings. That's the goal of our study. Some schools and teachers waste a lot of time playing around with living Latin, speaking Latin, having classes where the students are encouraged to speak in Latin. In the 1500s, that was important because Latin was the academic language. It was the language of the government. It was the language of the schools. It was the language of the church. It was a living language. And that's why schools immersed students in spoken, living Latin. But even when they did that, it was real Latin. It wasn't Latin made up by a modern teacher or a modern textbook. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we're not interested at all in spending any time on so-called living Latin or spoken Latin or composing in Latin, because that's simply not useful. It's not necessary for anything that we're going to do in life, not necessary in our studies. Our goal in the study of classical grammar is to read and interpret the classical languages rightly. All right? So as we move into the second part of grammar and the study of Greek grammar, what we get into are the parts of speech. And this is really the subject of etymology. The subject of the second part of grammar, the subject of etymology, is the study of the parts of speech. Now, the reason why this is important in the context of philosophy, which I just explained a little bit, is that we're seeking to know the order of spoken things or spoken signs of ideas in our mind. We're seeking to know the order. To know the order, we don't study individual things. If you wanted to know the order of the natural world, you wouldn't go out, or at least a wise man wouldn't go out into the world and start picking up individual stones and studying them to learn all the details of an individual stone. And then he would study that stone and put that aside and then walk over and pick up a stick and then study the stick and learn, as much as he can about that individual stick, and then set that aside and then go and find a leaf and so on through nature. You can call that nature study. You can call it nature study, but that's not natural philosophy. Natural philosophy seeks to know the order of the natural world, the order that God established in the creation of the physical world. We don't study individuals. We study classes or universals. And some of this for grammar students may be a little bit difficult, but I want to provide this explanation so that as you get started, you can understand that this is a part of a much bigger focus in your education. We're not just studying words and letters and sentences. We're beginning the study of philosophy. A wise man seeks to know order. And so, since in grammar our subject is language, we want to know the order that exists in language, the order that God Himself has created in human thought and communication. We seek to know the order. We seek to study classes of things or universals, because if we know the characteristics of a class, anything that can be said of that class can also be said of the individuals in that class. And that's how we study to know order. If we look at a language, we'll see that there are thousands and thousands of words. And if we were to study language by studying individual words, it would be like the person who studies nature by studying individual rocks and sticks. That's not how a wise man studies. We would never learn wisdom that way. What we seek to understand is the order of language. And even though there are thousands and thousands of words, all of those words divide into just 8 different classes of words. All of the words in the Greek language divide into these 8 different classes. When we study the characteristics of each one of these classes, we then know something about all of the words that belong to that class. So if there are 10,000 Greek nouns, when we learn the characteristics of a noun, we know something that's essential about every one of those nouns in the class of nouns, or every one of those words in the class of nouns. When we learn the characteristics of verbs, the knowledge that we have of the characteristics of the verbs allows us to know something about something essential, not just some random trivia. But when we study the characteristics of a verb, we then know something essential about every word within the class of verbs. And so this is how we pursue the knowledge of order in language. We know that the words of the Greek language, all of them, can be divided into 8 different classes. And these 8 classes are called the parts of speech. These 8 classes are called the parts of speech because they're the parts from which speech is constructed. In etymology, we're going to study each one of the 8 parts of speech by themselves to understand the characteristics of each different class of words in the Greek language. In Greek grammar 2, we're going to study syntax or construction. In Greek grammar 2, we learn how these different parts of speech are put together to form sentences. That's Greek grammar 2. That's syntax. In Greek grammar 1, we're going to study etymology, which is the study of each of the 8 parts of speech. So in the Greek language, all of the words can be divided into 8 different classes. The first class is articles. The second class is nouns, then pronouns, and verbs. Then we have participles, adverbs, prepositions, and conjunctions. These are the 8 parts of speech. So if you open up the writings of Plato or Aristotle or the writings of the Greek New Testament, you can pick any word on any of those pages, thousands and thousands of words. You can pick any word, and I can tell you which class, which of these 8 classes that word belongs to. That's the purpose of the study of etymology. And I can tell you something essential about every word in any Greek book based on my knowledge of Greek etymology. And by the end of Greek Grammar 1, you'll be able to do the same thing. So that's the purpose of studying etymology. We seek to know the order of the Greek language. We seek to understand the relationships between the words in the Greek language. We seek to know something about all of the words by studying the characteristics of the classes into which all of the words in the Greek language can be divided. That's the study of etymology. There are 8 parts of speech, just like in classical Latin, but there's 2 differences between Latin and Greek. First of all, you see that in Greek we have an article. In Latin, there are no articles. Just a comment on Latin for those of you who have studied Latin grammar in the academy. You'll remember that early in Latin Grammar 1, we learned to use the pronoun hic, haec, hoc as a sign of the gender of nouns and adjectives. You remember that we learned hic, haec, hoc as a sign of gender. What we were doing with the pronoun hic, haec, hoc was just using it like a Greek article. Okay, so there's no article in Latin, but in Latin Grammar 1, we used the pronoun hic, haec, hoc as if it was an article, just so that we could imitate the function or one of the functions of the article in Greek. And we use the pronoun to do that. The other thing you'll remember from Latin reading, is that when we translate from Latin into English, we would add the articles. We would add the words the or a or an, and we'd always put them in parentheses because there's no articles in the Latin language. In Greek, there are articles. So we're not going to put words like a and an and the in parentheses in Greek because those words will actually be present in the original Greek text. So there are articles in Greek and there are no articles in Latin. The other thing you'll notice as we go through here is that in Latin, the 8th part of speech was the interjection. And in Greek, we see there's no interjection listed among the 8 parts of speech. So those are the 2 differences between the etymology of Greek and the etymology of Latin. So that's a good introduction to the parts of speech, and I took some time at the beginning of this video to just sort of set this study of etymology into its larger context so you can understand as you work in Greek grammar, what you're really doing is laying the foundation on which we're going to build your knowledge of Greek syntax, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, the philosophical sciences, and ultimately the study of Catholic theology. So I hope that's a helpful intro to the 8 parts of speech, to Greek etymology, and our next lessons in Greek grammar. If you have any questions, please contact me, and we'll make sure we understand this clearly so we can move on sure footing step by step as we get moving in Greek grammar. God bless.